Welcome to THEKI, your podcast for awareness, health, and happiness. My name is Sandra, and I am delighted to be able to talk to you about a topic that is very close to my heart, and which I have also written a lot about in my book, Soul Power. The title of today's podcast is Soul Dream and Free Will. Perhaps you've also wondered if we brought something like a soul plan with us, at least something vague, some talents and gifts and some possibilities to perhaps bring them into the world, perhaps also some things we still want to balance, things we want to experience, not directly prescribed, but rather as a potential, as a possibility in the room. If we have brought something like that with us and then get pulled away from somewhere, where is our free will at the same time? And I've noticed that there are so many questions surrounding all these soul-related topics. They're constantly flying towards me. Where do I come from? Who am I really? Which path should I take? And most importantly, how do I recognize this path? How can I hear my soul radio again? Why are certain people by my side even when they are difficult to deal with? Or what if it doesn't seem to fit at all? Which decision will move me forward now, will truly take me in the desired direction? Am I even allowed to intervene in all that is happening? Or am I thereby placing myself above a possible divine plan? Yes, do these questions sound familiar to you? There are so many different people, and some are simply among those who knew what they wanted to be even as children and are still very clear in their soul power today. And others struggle, stumble, and grope in the dark and don't even know what they should be listening to. Do you understand the bigger picture of your existence, or are you like many others who have more questions than answers inside you? So whatever the case may be, there is still a lot of uncertainty here. And yes, right from the start, it is practically impossible for me to present the depth and diversity of all these possibilities in a single podcast. And I've already done several podcasts on this topic in which individual issues were also addressed. So please check out the show notes at the end of this video and look for the links. I'll link them all. Videos and interviews I've already made on the topics of soul plan, reconnecting with one's soul, following your soul's path, and so on. Also, there's my book, Soul Power, and also the intensive seminar of the same name, where we clarify not only these topics, but really everything that raises questions on this topic of the soul. But I still want to take out individual aspects from time to time and touch on them specifically here. And so today I'll start with a question. If we have a soul plan, what becomes of our free will then? And for that, I might have to elaborate a little and also assume a certain depth on your part. Let's first talk about this phase between incarnations. I also call it the soul cinema. So I'm just going to assume that you're already aware that you chose this incarnation on a soul level beforehand in order to have certain experiences, to ultimately refine and illuminate yourself. A plan like that, when we sort of choose it for ourselves, it's not something rigid. And that's why I also understand everyone who says, nope, there's no such thing as a soul plan. It all just unfolds here. There's some truth to that too. Stick with me. I'll break it down for you. The way I see it, it's not rigid, but it's a kind of guiding thread that always wants to gently lead you to your main path, to your golden path of life. Maybe you know this image, maybe it's familiar to you. When I'm sometimes facing decisions, I imagine that I have several paths now, and they spread out before me, but only one of them. It shines golden, and I know with certainty that's the one. It's the one that resonates directly with my heart. And the other paths, they might be good from a logical perspective, they might be good for some other reasons, but it wouldn't be my golden path of the heart, and that's why I stay on my main path. And it's always the case that when we stay on this main path, we get an absolute tailwind in our favor because our spiritual team can then work well with us, can arrange meetings, let books fall at our feet, create situations that serve us, and yes, support our growth. And then soulmates are also much easier for us to recognize, and we can discover together or even know directly what we arranged to do here in this incarnation and why we have met now. When you're on your soul path, your soul radio is well tuned, and then you can perceive the messages from your soul. You can simply understand them, and in this way, allow yourself to be guided, yes, gently, but also firmly. This becomes clearer and clearer the more we trust this guidance. Our heart compass is then fully active, and we once again have a fully functioning truth indicator that not only guides us through decisions, but also when people tell us things, when the media tells us things, whatever it may be. We all still, to some extent, look upon the world stage. We can simply distinguish one from the other very clearly. We don't have to ask others what is true because our truth indicator, our heart compass, tells us exactly and instantly. Of course, we are always free to choose differently. We can stray from our main road, and you can take detours to the left and right of your main road, venturing into side streets. But you'll probably notice that on these side streets, you have less and less energy available and less works out. So the problems, the apparent problems, start to pile up. Because your soul doesn't really support these detours. If it does, it's only to a very limited extent when certain experiences make sense again, but you won't have as much soul power available to you. Your soul will use certain corrective measures to gently remind you that you're not quite on the right track on this detour. And yes, in short, these reminders look like this. You're meant to somehow notice that this isn't quite the right path. Maybe you'll get sick, or you'll constantly have problems with friends or at work, bullying, whatever it may be, or in your relationship. Maybe there are even accidents or similar things. These are all signs that you've strayed so far from your main road that your soul can barely reach you anymore. So the farther you move away, the louder the calls or the actions become. And then there are also cases where the soul decides it's better to excarnate now, that is, to leave the body and perhaps choose a new incarnation instead of continuing senselessly here, because the soul simply says to itself, "We've strayed so far, this can't be fixed anymore. What I had planned for this incarnation is over." Yes, so I could go on about this for a long time, but I've also made a podcast about it, about when souls excarnate. Sorry for giving you so many more recommendations, but these are really profound topics, and it's complex, and not everything fits into a single podcast. That's why I'm consciously giving you this part of the responsibility. If you want to know more, it's up to you to seek it out. Yes? The topics are all there. Yes. So if you don't fulfill your soul plan, what happens then? There are many variations, but I mainly want to explain two of them now. The first variation is that you get very entangled in the fear matrix and become denser and denser so that you can't fulfill your soul plan. Perhaps you then experience a great deal of unnecessary suffering that didn't have to be, that your soul didn't really choose. And possibly the soul then also excarnates prematurely because it sees that it can no longer fulfill here what it came for. The second is that you take off to such an extent that you can even receive new downloads, choose more tasks or experiences, or even merge parallel incarnations. So I'd like to explain that briefly because it's really important and also pretty wild. So it's not uncommon, and I've experienced it a few times now, that there are parallel incarnations that can be merged at a certain point. So parallel incarnations. That means that your higher self has incarnated in several parts, in several soul parts. To paint a very simple picture, perhaps one part of your higher self chose to have the experience of career and wealth, but to live without a family, to have no distractions. And another part chose the experience of having a wonderful family, but being in a state of financial lack. Both chose these experiences in order to grow, to be able to redefine their true inner values, and yes, certain self-imposed limits. Because it's always a self-imposed limit in an incarnation, for example, that you can experience lack. Lack is not natural. Our birthright is abundance. Our natural state is abundance. That means when we condense ourselves in a certain area to the point that we can experience a lack of money or a lack of love, of friendship, of trust, whatever it may be, then we choose that because, of course, the challenge is break through it. Master the topic. Realize in the end that it's an illusion that you have a lack. And if both of these incarnated parts manage to do this at the same time, then these timelines can be merged. And in this very simple example here, it would mean that in one incarnation, both could then be lived. Abundance, prosperity, and a happy family. In other words, abundance in every respect. I know that explanations like these might really challenge your linear thinking mind because we're used to thinking in the parameters of time and space, and within that mental framework, we can't imagine how something like this could happen. But space-time is in fact an inherently limited space, as the word itself suggests, which is only real in 3D or 4D. I have to point this out to you again. I've also explained the different levels in other podcasts, for example, in the one on the multidimensionality of time. Yes, so only in 3D and 4D does space-time exist in the form that we are most familiar with. And beyond that, so when we ascend to 5D or higher, different laws apply. Strictly speaking, everything is now. Past, present, future. Everything is now. That's why we can influence the future and also clear the past, because everything is now. And if everything is now, then naturally, with the suspension of space-time, everything is also here. It's logical, it can't be any other way. But we'll get into that another time. Let's now turn to the question of where exactly your free will comes into play. Does it exist or not? Strictly speaking, it was and is always in play. But we also perceive this very differently on different vibrational levels. Let's quickly summarize again. Before this incarnation, you created a soul plan together with your closest, dearest soulmates, that is, with your spiritual team. In the best case scenario, you live it out completely, but soul plans are not binding. No one forces you to follow a plan if you choose to do something else. Since we choose these plans ourselves, we can also make a new choice once we reach a certain level of consciousness. And that's where it always depends on how conscious we are and on which level we make a new choice. Do we choose anew in 3D, often out of suffering or defiance or whatever it may be, or do we choose anew in very high vibrations from which something truly wonderful can then emerge? And that's why the concept of free will is often so difficult to understand, because it crucially depends on the level from which we are looking at it. And I'm going to describe this now using the levels of 3D, 4D, and 5D, our main levels. Although we operate on all 12 dimensions, actually it's 13, but that's simply not important at the moment, what other levels there are. The most important thing right now is that we move out of 3D through 4D and into 5D. And that's completely possible for anyone if they just want to. So in 3D, in the limited space-time, we seem to have no free will. We do make choices here and there, but this choosing happens from the ego, and then we seemingly succumb to our fate. In this reality, there are also right and wrong decisions which don't exist at all in the higher levels. Since our view into the higher levels is extremely limited, we can't clearly distinguish between light and darkness, and thus can't protect ourselves from the illusions, the abuse, and the external control of the fear matrix. That means we more or less stumble through certain experiences that we have in a higher sense set for ourselves, but don't understand in this dense vibration. And so it sometimes happens that we unconsciously give away our free will, yes, even sell it outright. That's where the saying comes from, he or she has sold their soul, by submitting ourselves to certain things, like, for example, the great mammon, material possessions, or also success, fame, recognition, attention, whatever it may be. The fear matrix, with all its illusions, it tricks us into seeing this as desirable. And as a result, our own soul parts can transform and become so bound in lower levels that they act within us like destructive beings, practically against us. Until our consciousness expands and grasps that there is more, and can also comprehend 4D. Because in 4D we understand certain things, we see the bigger picture, and we can choose anew. In 4D, we recognize all this destructiveness of the fear matrix because the light of awakening is at work within us, and therefore makes all the dark, unredeemed places within us visible. That's why they are far from being resolved, but we see clearly. And with this clarity also comes, yes, simply the urge, the necessity to look at the unredeemed within us, to understand it, and to finally redeem it, because then it's also perfectly clear to us, what I don't resolve today will come back tomorrow until I finally look at it. And so, little by little, our vibration becomes finer and finer. We realize there's no such thing as fate, but that we ourselves have a significant influence and can truly be creative, can make changes. In 3D, we may have chosen certain things that we no longer like, and now in 4D, we can change them. Even across time, meaning across generations and incarnations. And in this way, we use our creative power more and more, and that's brilliant. And that's why most of you listening are at least in 4D, because you're all already applying this, you already understand it. You've all had the experience of a manifestation coming true, or a healing working, or that after you resolved a trauma from the apparent past, a certain unwanted condition was no longer there. And that is what we can build on. And this new freedom, it can also hold us back at times, because doubt can creep back in, and perhaps we get the impression that we're not supposed to interfere, that we might be placing ourselves above the divine will, above the divine plan, and that maybe we don't have the right to simply impose our own will. But honestly, why would the divine give us free will if we're not allowed to use it? The only question is, how do we use it? On what level? Do we use it in a wholesome way, in a life-affirming, healing way, or for ego-driven things for 3D? And as long as we are on that life-affirming, loving track, it's always the divine track. Do you understand? When we understand how everything is connected and we explore our own, yes, plans and experiences ever more deeply, then we also understand more and more that our true will is simultaneously the divine will. The true will, not the ego will, the true one, that which truly moves us from within, drives us from within. What is our heart's path, our heart's compass? And the challenge always lies precisely in transcending this lower ego will, in freeing ourselves from worldly desires and following the will of our soul. Yes, and in 5D, I'm just mentioning this now for the sake of completeness, because in that vibration, we can no longer avoid living our soul's plan to the fullest and putting our creative potential into everything, to ensoul everything we deal with. Because in this 5D consciousness, we have simply left the old limitations, all the dogmas, the fears, the doubts completely behind us. As I've been saying for many years, everything is vibration. And that's why that's why it's always the most important thing on this journey to be mindful and to gradually free ourselves from anything that vibrates at a low frequency, no matter what the topic is. So let's summarize again before we move on. So there are different levels of our free will within the soul plan. There's an unredeemed level from which we, as if by fate, yes, more or less stumble out and stumble through the challenges. There are more awakened levels where we resolve karma and thereby initiate a realignment of our path, in a sense, changing our decision. And there are even unexpectedly rapid developments so that parallel incarnations can even be merged to have more soul power available at once. And there are premature terminations for a wide variety of reasons. Also, I want to mention this as well. An experience can be spread out over several incarnations. So there's absolutely no pressure if you've set out to do something in this incarnation or many things to get them all done this time around. There's no time limit whatsoever. There's no pressure at all. There is only the soul's desire for experience. And in the end, who wants to discuss in detail how long it took in a timeless space? And what do you think? Does that challenge your mind? For most people, it's not that easy to think across time, but that is precisely one of the great qualities of this timeline we are currently on. As I also explained in the podcast about timelines, and I will come back to this topic again later. I wrote a quote about this. In 3D, you believe you have free will, but that is only your ego will. In 4D, you begin to question your free will, apply it on a higher level, and start to choose. In 5D, you finally realize that it was never your own will, but always the divine will. So, and to conclude, I'd like to talk with you about the topic of the soul radio, the soul GPS, and also about silence. Perhaps you're still wondering, even after all these explanations, why you chose this particular life, this family, this place to live, this country, this history, whatever it may be. And no one on the outside can answer that for you directly. It's something you can work on together, yes, but all the answers are within you. And to bring them out, only one thing helps: to really turn your soul radio back on, tune it correctly, and turn the volume all the way up. Because this inner knowledge needs to be rediscovered, to be uncovered. And a lot of that happens simply through introspection, through communication with our soul. And for that to happen, it often needs to be quiet, especially in the beginning, if you can't quite hear it yet. Because our soul loves to communicate with us and actually does so quite a lot. The question is whether we understand and accept it. And, in everyday life, so many things are louder. Everything really is louder than this inner voice. And it's truly essential to make your peace with silence and to find your deepest home within that silence. People who can't handle silence, who always have to have music playing or podcasts or whatever else they need, they are accustomed to information from the outside. But from the silence come your own soul vibes entirely from within. And there's another difference. Your soul sends you information in its own unique vibration. Your soul doesn't shout at you. It has its own unique way. And getting to know this way attunes you to it so that you can hear it in any life situation, even when it's loud, to still hear it, to hear it without a doubt, and to accept it. The ego tends to shout, just as news, movies, and so on are always loud. And your soul has its own unique melody. And at first it's quiet and yet so infinitely powerful when you engage with it. And yes, the clearest and simplest messages from your soul appear as images, as daydreams, also as longings. Yes, that which we truly want, what our deep yearning is, our heart's desire, we can achieve that too, because we've brought the right potential with us for it. And that is constantly communicating, it resonates, which is why this longing exists. And you feel it in your heart. Where is it pulling you? What brings you joy? And where does it perhaps feel very heavy? You don't want to do it at all, but you believe you have to. You just drag yourself along. Does your heart open up at the mere thought of something or someone? Or does it give you an unpleasant pang? Is there anything that makes you jump out of bed in the morning? Something you want to call out to the world? That call is your calling. You know, even if it sometimes seems like you can't do it, or rather your ego wants to convince you of that, it always has so many reasons. You need money, or you're too old, or too young, or you don't know the language, or whatever it may be. You can trust in the soul plan, even if others have already tried and failed. If it's anchored in your soul plan, then you will succeed, no matter what happened with the others. For them, perhaps it wasn't in their soul plan. So don't look at others, don't look outside yourself. No one knows your soul plan, which is why many people will, mostly unintentionally, give you the wrong advice. They don't mean any harm, they simply can't help it just because they don't know. They draw on their own experiences, not on yours. They draw on their own potential, not on yours. Do you understand? But if you feel it deep inside, then you should turn your soul radio all the way up and just to dance only to this music and to no other. Yes, and often the soul's plan isn't revealed to us so directly. Instead, it's more like, yes, a path of realization unfolds. And that path might also be paved with a learning task or two that we get to master in order to, yes, reach a necessary maturity or vibration where we are then truly ready for this soul's purpose. So when I think back, if someone had told me in my childhood what I would later do for a living, that I would be speaking in front of thousands of people every year, my system probably would have shut down and found some way to escape it. Because back then I didn't have the maturity and the self-confidence that you really need for that. You know, there isn't always just one answer to the question of your soul's plan. Sometimes there is, sometimes it comes through very clearly, but sometimes it's simply an incredibly wise guidance through your life to prepare you, to get you ready for what you came here to do. Trust your soul's path. Trust the grand plan. Trust those who walk by your side. Trust the longings of your heart. Trust your inner guidance. In everyday life, it's important that you enter into silence again and again to communicate with your soul, to really keep that connection active and receive the constant messages and impulses. If we're constantly busy with other things, we only keep our loud ego active, and the soul's power can't really break through those layers. And then it might seem more important to us to get this and that done, or to somehow hold on until day X instead of just letting go, getting into the flow and trusting that inner guidance. When your connection is strong, you are centered in your heart, and that is your soul's GPS, guiding you through life. It guides you lovingly, it guides you powerfully and wisely, and as you decide more and more for a heart-based life, it will become easier and easier for you to spontaneously follow your soul's GPS and to trust it completely, regardless of whether your mind is lagging behind or not. Because one thing is very important, the mind must be in the service of the soul. It's not at all important that you can always explain things with your mind right away. Regarding that, you should internalize something very important. Your mind cannot make decisions because it doesn't know what your soul's plan entails. It can't understand it multidimensionally, at least not yet. But it is the perfect companion for the material, earthly reality. And that means there is a perfect sequence. First, your soul's radio must be turned on. And then when you know what you want, where you're headed, your logical, perfectly structured mind can initiate all the necessary steps. It then creates a plan, knows exactly what's needed, who should participate, whatever it may be, to perfectly implement what your soul has already chosen. So soul and mind should absolutely work together, but in the right sequence and combination. With every decision, you can just briefly breathe into your heart, focus on your heart, and just feel into it. Does it feel light or heavy? Does a positive pull arise, an inner yes? Does joy emerge or not so much? And that is the beginning of your guidance. And you can follow it, and it will become more and more clearer and clearer, brighter and brighter. And the more you let yourself be guided by your soul's GPS, the quieter you become on the outside. You no longer seek advice from other people because you know that you find all the answers, solutions, and paths directly within you. There might be more and more people who can't quite understand you anymore. Yes, learn to live with that. Maybe you won't even understand yourself at times until your mind has settled back into its role and catches up again. Maybe you explain a little less and smile a little more. And this smile, it has something soulful, something profoundly wise, knowing, and truly eternal. This smile has the power to inspire others, because even if their mind doesn't understand you, their heart can directly feel this unique frequency that a genuine person emits. And I want to ask you now, do you have the will and also the courage to be that person? Let that sink in. I want to conclude with one of my favorite quotes from Rumi. I was a seeker and I still am, but I have stopped asking the books and the stars and started to listen to the teachings of my soul. I'm so glad you're here. See you soon.